So YouTube is apparently removing the dislike count from its platform, and it's a very important thing to distinguish that they're removing the dislike count, the dislike counter. They are not removing the dislike button, but as far as you and I are concerned as viewers, that means somebody is not going to be able to see how many people dislike the video. Once they click dislike, they still can't see how many people dislike the video, but they can still see all the likes, all the thumbs up. They can see that counter. And I'm talking about the viewer. The content creator, such as myself and such as any other number of YouTube channels, can still see how many people dislike the video, and that's fine. Even that has some implications itself. But the viewer cannot see how many people disliked the content, although they can still dislike it. With all the backlash that I've seen some huge content creators with tens of millions of subscribers, or at least, 15 million subscribers, 12, 13 million. So like Linus Tech Tips, for instance, has been blasted on Twitter about his disapproval of YouTube removing the dislike button. And he brought up a very critical point in all of this. He basically said that this will allow for scammers to run rampant, that this move by YouTube does nothing but to, among other things, it harms the viewer. So now when the viewer clicks on something, they can't see how many people disliked it. That means they will waste their time, theoretically. Well, not theoretically, they will waste their time with how-to videos or reviews or demonstrations that don't work. So, for instance, let's just say there's a what was it, The Verge? I don't want to get this wrong. Was it The Verge? One of those major publications within the past year and a half, 2 years, came out with a PC build guide, an infamous PC build guide, which was way wrong and just riddled with errors and was basically kind of the laughingstock of the internet. And with this dislike count disabled, that means more people would watch that and theoretically be misled, or at the very minimum, waste their time on such content. Now, I will tell you, first of all, it is my opinion that getting rid of the dislike button, getting rid of the dislike counter is a major misstep by YouTube. I would go so far as to say that even by the time this video uploads, YouTube might actually reverse course on this. If they don't reverse course on this by the time I upload this video, and if you're listening to the radio show or the podcast, yes, I'm uploading at least this first segment to YouTube. I'll talk about Alder Lake and M1 Max and its relationship between the two later in the show. I'll talk about drones later in the show. So if you're just listening to this or watching this on YouTube, make sure you grab the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player, and you can hear me talk about those items and hundreds of other items. Literally, if I have hundreds of episodes available, so Spotify, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, whatever you listen to your podcast with, just search for Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and there you go. But let me get back at it. So back to what I was saying. I believe that YouTube, and you can kind of mark my words on this, I believe that YouTube will reinstate the dislike counter. After all the backlash, and especially after all the backlash from big-time YouTubers, I think they'll reinstate it. It's possible that by the time I upload this video, it'll be reinstated. But, it's also possible, some might argue likely, that by the time I upload this, you won't be able to see how many dislikes this video has. And there are always dislikes. Let me speak to that for a moment, because that people who've listened to the show, they've heard me mention a time or two that I am all for the dislike button on all social media. I think every social media platform would benefit from a dislike button, especially Facebook. We would watch the world burn if Facebook, or Meta, whatever you want to call it, implemented a dislike button so that you could see that so-and-so disliked it. Yes, they have the angry face, but I don't think that's really the same. We need a big, fat, red thumbs down button on Facebook to keep a lot of people's echo chambers in check. So anyways, the dislike button for YouTube, anybody who creates content for YouTube I think they have a love-hate relationship. Overall, they have a respect for the tool that is the dislike counter. And yes, content creators will still be able to see that people dislike the video. But while getting dislikes kind of stung, it was almost like the more popular the video got. So I have a video about the PSP that I did a couple years ago. That's 300,000 views or clicks or views or whatever by now. It's over 250,000, and it has, enough dislikes. And once you have enough dislikes, that means that tons of people are watching your video. Tons of people are engaging their video. They're clicking, they're engaging with your video. Even if it's a dislike, it tells the algorithm that, hey, people are engaging with this content. So while getting dislikes kind of stings sometimes, it is a useful tool for creators to see what works and what doesn't on their platform. So for instance, if I uploaded a video that was kind of, part of my French, half-assed, I could see that, okay, that content doesn't work. Yeah, I kind of dialed that one in. Maybe I need to be more thoughtful of the content I upload to YouTube. So the dislike counter being gone, bad move by YouTube, and it's going to be terrible, especially for the viewers. It's going to be a scammer's paradise now that you can't see the dislike count on videos. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. If you're just joining me for this segment, you are worthy of love. We'll be back for more Geek Therapy Radio. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I ended the last segment by saying, if you're only listening to this segment, you're worthy of love. Everybody is worthy of love. I didn't mean that just somebody listening to my show at that moment is worthy of love, even though that's true also. I usually end the show with this, but I can't say it too much. It doesn't hurt to say this too much, because there's somebody who might be jogging through the dial right now, on the radio. For those of you who just listen to the podcast, I am broadcast, not live, but I am broadcast here in Houston, currently on KPRC 950 AM. As of recording, the show is on 10 p.m. Saturday nights and 6 p.m. Sunday evenings. So if I'm just catching somebody on the dial who has never heard the show before, first of all, I need to mention, this is not an infomercial. I know that when you listen to the radio on the weekends, it's just chock full of real estate infomercials and insurance infomercials and investment infomercials. This is not an infomercial. This is just a real radio show called Geek Therapy Radio, where we talk about all things geeky. And one of the things I end the show with every week is to remind you, this is for somebody who's just flipping through, who just found the show, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love, and you are worthy of receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. So lean into your geek thing, because I think that when we lean into our geek things, that gives us confidence, and that helps us with our self-worth and our value. So whether it's an old hobby or a new hobby, high-tech, low-tech, whatever you're into or whatever you used to be into that you fell out of, maybe get back into it if it's something healthy. I say that we're geeks about like cars, and we're geeks about microphones and recording gear and video games and Bluetooth controllers and headphones and audiophile stuff and everyday carries and DSLR cameras and airplanes and trains. I'm looking at trains right now on Amazon. Ubuntu and Linux and distributions and shells and terminals and all sorts of stuff. I'm not talking about being geeks about drug use or abusing alcohol or anything like that. So I'm not saying if you used to drink a lot, hey, you should drink a lot because that'll help. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I was talking to somebody about this recently that, I was kind of clarifying the show, kind of explaining the show to them. I don't think they had listened before or ever heard of it. I mean, most people have never heard of the show. So if you like the show, tell people about it. I was telling them that, I remember what it was. It was for a video that I'm doing for the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Anyways, I said, one of the things I say on the show, and kind of one of the points I try to make and kind of the vibes I try to give, is that nobody can judge another person for what we're a geek about. I mean, unless it's something that is personally destructive or harmful to others. You can't be a geek about heroin. You can be a geek about muscle building and cars and everything I just mentioned, but a geek thing is not cocaine. A geek thing is not heroin. A geek thing is not meth. A geek thing ain't even smoking or drinking alcohol. Now, abusing alcohol. I need to clarify that, because there are geeks about craft brew, and that's perfectly fine. James Simpson, who shares time on this radio station, What's on Tap Radio. It's a great radio program all about craft brewing. So it's one thing to be a geek about craft brewing and all the chemistry involved there and the science involved there and the art involved there, but it's another thing to be guzzling 36 Bud Lights, in 5 hours, because you can't even feel a buzz unless you're drinking at least 40 beers. No, that's an alcoholic. That's being alcoholic. That's destructive. So I was talking to my friend that as long as it's not self-destructive or harmful to others, all classes of geekdom is welcome, and I think a healthy thing in most circumstances. So for instance, if there's a grown man out there who likes to collect Barbie dolls for whatever reason, some of us might think that's a little weird. But you know what? If that's his thing, if that's what keeps him sane, and that's what kind of gives him drive and purpose, and that's what motivates him, and he's not harming himself or anybody else, and he's healthy otherwise, we can't judge him for that. We can't judge another person for what their geek thing is, because there's things that we all do that others would consider kind of weird. So if there's a grown man who collects Barbie dolls from the 1950s and onward, it might not be our cup of tea, but we certainly can't judge him for it. And if he's not hurting himself or others, there are other things that he could be into. Maybe that person got into, maybe without collecting Barbie dolls for this grown man, he might fall into narcotics, or he might smoke like a chimney, or he might become an alcoholic. Maybe that's his healthy outlet. So I'm just saying, whatever you're into, don't be ashamed of it, and don't judge anybody for their healthy outlet geek thing. That's basically what the show is all about. And from time to time, I have guests on the show, like the 8-Bit Guy and LGR Clint from Lazy Game Reviews, and James Rolfe from Cinemassacre, Angry Video Game Nerd. I have all sorts of people calling from This Does Not Compute, all sorts of YouTube channels and publications. I had Eben Upton on here, the CEO and founder of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Funny thing about that interview, so I was just saying, we're all geeks about all sorts of different things, and so I have geeks from all over all walks of life. I have astronomers on here, physicists on here, computer scientists on here talking about quantum computing. I'm very fascinated with cold fusion. So we're all into these different geek things, and that's completely fine and completely healthy. That is what the show is all about. Mostly it's just me kind of vamping on what I'm geeking out about at the moment. And before I went off on this diatribe here, this tangent here, I was going to talk this segment about my recent geeking outings with my drones. I technically have 3 drones. I have a Phantom 3, DJI Phantom 3 Platinum that the camera doesn't work, the body of it still works, the remote still works, everything's fine with it, but the camera doesn't work, so there's kind of like no point to it. I also have the first generation DJI Mavic Pro, and my most recent pickup is my DJI Mini SE. It's the cheapest DJI drone that they make, and I've been tinkering recently. I've been flying the SE a lot because it's so much easier to fly that Mini SE, because you can charge it. I've talked about this in past episodes. You can go back and listen to it, but it's just extremely convenient to just take with you anywhere and use and charge anywhere and offload footage anywhere. So I've been using the SE a lot. And then I go back to the Mavic, because the other day I did this really neat kind of show promo that I did put up on YouTube and that I shared on Facebook, I think, where I basically put my Mini SE up in the air, and then I use my Mavic Pro to video my Mini SE while it was in midair. It's really cool. I'm filming a drone with a drone. It doesn't get much more meta than that. So when I was working with the footage from the Mini SE and my Mavic Pro, I was like, why does the Mini SE's footage straight out of the drone look so much better than the Mavic Pro's? And so that got me on a little tinker tangent, I guess is a good way to put it. I started tinkering with the camera settings and everything in the DJI Mavic Pro. I thought I had them set right, but I made sure my sharpness was set just right, made sure the contrast set just right, the saturation was set just right. I put it into D-Log, which is more of a flat picture that you can offload off the drone, and if you're do a lot of post-production, that you can color grade and mess with the footage a little bit better. The only thing that the Mavic Pro doesn't do that would help it, I think, is obviously it can't offload in ProRes. It can't offload in any uncompressed format. Out of the drone onto the SD card, it's already it's a compressed format. It's an MP4 or an MOV file, and it's already compressed. So there's not a whole lot of grading and editing you can do to the picture, but you can help it by putting it into D-Log and adjusting your contrast and your sharpness and your saturation a little bit, basically to take the edge off of all of them, because out of the box it's set too high. And I've done that, and I've been having fun with my Mavic. And it's such a great thing to pick up an old toy, quote unquote, and re-fall in love with it. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. This is the longest segment of the show. First segment, 8 minutes. Second segment, 10 minutes. Third segment, which we're in right now, is 11 minutes. Then the fourth segment will be 10 minutes again, for a total of 39 minutes. Anyways, in this segment, I'm going to talk about Intel's new CPU offerings out of the gate, Alder Lake. One could argue their response to Apple's M1 chip, or M1 Pro and M1 Max. I will talk about in this segment, but I want to finish a thought real quick. Coming out of the last segment, I said it's so fun when you re-fall in love with an old toy, and there's this kind of paradox that happens. It's an ironic paradox, and I understand that this is a hard sell to your wife or your husband if you're an eccentric geek or a collector like I am. One could argue, so I'll just give you, for example, my wife, kind of when I get a new thing, like a good example is I collect vintage computers, so old like 286s and 386s and 486s, and I don't want 5 486s. I don't want 10 Pentiums from the 90s. No, I want kind of one good example of each kind of era. So anyways, I have a relationship with a resale shop, which I've had him on, the guest on the show, Bray's Resale Shop here in Houston. Go back and listen to that episode. And once in a while, he'll call me. He'll have worked with an estate, and he'll say, hey, I've got an old Mac, or like an Apple II. Do you want this old Apple II? And I'm like, yeah. And then my wife immediately is like, so what are you going to do with the that other Apple? Don't you already have like another Apple or another old computer? Are you going to get rid of that? And I'm just like, no. Are you crazy? I'm not getting rid of that. And I think that's a very common dynamic in some relationships is, well, you got this new thing. Are you going to get rid of the old thing? Like, no. I mean, it depends on the thing. And it all comes back around to, I do get, every once in a while I do a cleanse. I call it kind of a ruthless culling of what I have. I am not in that state right now. I'm looking at a CRT right here. I'm looking at a Macintosh Performa 400 that I need to recap. I've got my Asus Zephyrus G14 with the RTX 3060 inside, just kind of sitting here. It's my Steam. It's currently just my Steam streaming box, so I can stream like Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 down to an old 2012 iMac or Mac Mini downstairs. So I've got I've got a bunch of stuff, but let's talk about older stuff and kind of collecting older stuff. I don't know how to phrase this. I don't know how to get this concept to the listener here, but I keep stuff to keep me from buying new stuff. And I know that sounds absolutely moronic, and to a degree, it is moronic. But there have been times when I don't make a lot of money, but there's been times when I've had less money. I've been less well off, and I've been happy that I did not give away my PS1 or PS2, that I did not give away my old Nintendo, or that I did not give away my old laptop, or I did not give away, some extra DDR3 RAM that I thought I never need, that I didn't give away a Q6600 when I upgraded, did a 771 mod to the 775 socket, and I put a Xeon in there, and I kept the old Q6600 processor just in a Ziploc baggie. I'm glad that I haven't got rid of that stuff, because in those kind of more lean times, that's what itched that urge to buy something. When I wanted to buy something new or tinker with something new, I was like, well, I still have this stuff. What can I do with that DDR3 RAM? What can I do with that computer processor? What can I do with that old motherboard? Oh, I can put together a whole new computer. I can tinker with that. I can mess around with that. I can try to overclock this thing without much regard, because it's it's an out of date, very cheap, almost useless piece of gear. I did a video recently, a couple years ago, about the Q6600 in 2019 or 2020, if it's still viable in the 21st century, this far into the 21st century, and it is. So you can check out that video. It's pretty popular on YouTube. But I'm glad I kept that old stuff, because it kept me from buying new stuff in that instance when I really couldn't afford to. It scratched that itch, and I think a lot of us can kind of relate to that. In a weird way, yes, I do want, I want the new Mavic 3, DJI Mavic 3 that's come out. It starts at like $2,300. It is purely in that want category. It is. I don't think I'm ever gonna get it, but it's so expensive. I think part of that is just the times we're living in. But it's so far out of the realm. But this cheaper, the Mavic Mini SE that I have, that was $300, it scratches that itch, and I'm loving it, and I'm enjoying it. And yes, the $2,300 drone is going to have more kind of pro features that I need for my workflow. For instance, the Mavic 3 does export in zero compression ProRes, lossless ProRes, and it has a built-in 1 terabyte drive just baked right into the drone, so it was making offloading footage really easy, and that uncompressed ProRes. It would be a huge benefit to me. Like if my employer said, hey, we're doing our budgets, what do you need? I'd be like, Mavic 3 would help. I also want an 8K camera, and those, I think the cheapest you can find are a few grand, $4,000 or $5,000, not even including a lens. So my list of wants is very expensive. And what keeps that list of wants from just eating away at me and making me make really stupid decisions is that I have kind of old stuff I go back to. I've been geeking out about the Raspberry Pi this week a lot. I've got the Raspberry Pi 02W, and I tried this week, and I still got to tinker with this. I wanted to record this show on that Raspberry Pi 02W, but I'm having issues with the microphone. It's kind of, the audio is a little bit glitchy. It plays back just fine, like pre-recorded audio that I've recorded elsewhere and loaded plays back just fine. Recording, it's glitchy. I think it has something to do with that I'm using an on-the-go, dongle out of the USB 2 connector, and I think there's too much plugged into it. I've got the SSD plugged into it. I've got the wireless receiver for the keyboard and mouse plugged into it, and a USB microphone plugged into it, and I think that's just too much. And I think that when I go to record, it's just kind of it's glitching, because it's just kind of like the power's not there. It's not enough. So either I need to use a powered USB hub, or I'm going to try to put the OS on a micro SD card, so I take the SSD off of that hub and whatever. I've been tinkering with Raspberry Pi, and I've been retinkering and updating my Raspberry Pi 400. I still maintain that Twister OS is the best operating system you can possibly use on a Raspberry Pi. My brief review, I know I'm going all over the place with this, I was going to talk about Alder Lake in M1 Pro and Max. That's going to be next segment. Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio, where my brain spazzes out about these things. Anyways, so I've been using the Raspberry Pi, geeking out about the Raspberry Pi. My mini review of the Pi 02W, yes, is that it's wonderful. It's $15. It will supercharge any project that you have an existing Raspberry Pi Zero. And what I mean by that is you still have the exact same 512 megabytes of DDR2 RAM. So the Pi Zero 2 is now a quad core, up from one core, but it still keeps the 512 megabytes of DDR2 RAM, which basically, if you do a fancy roundabout way of loading, Raspberry Pi OS onto a solid state drive, or even off the micro SD is fine, a good fast micro SD, you hit that limit of 512 megabytes. Like, you're going to open up LibreOffice or LibreWrite and open up a spreadsheet, and that's about all you're doing. Like, multitasking isn't really a thing with 512 megabytes of RAM to work with. So that's why I say it's a really cool device, $15, and I think what it's designed for is to basically be a drop-in replacement, because it is a drop-in replacement for a Pi Zero, for the first generation Pi Zero, where quad cores would be of a benefit. Quad cores, it's also clocked a little bit higher to 1 gigahertz, and you can overclock it easily to 1.3 gigahertz. So any application where having 3 more cores and extra megahertz of processing would benefit the project that the Pi Zero sits in, the Pi Zero 2 is perfect for that. As a standalone computer, it's tough. But like I said, I'm going to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to try to get the Pi Zero 2W. It's a $15 single board computer the size of a stick of gum. Make it a full-featured podcast computer. So Raspberry Pi OS, and then you put Reaper on there. You can download Reaper. It's a free program. That's what I'm using to record right now. I do all my podcasts with Reaper because it's cross-platform Linux, Mac, and Windows, and on Raspberry Pi. So I always have everything with me. No matter what platform I'm using, I can open Reaper and do the show on anything. But I'm trying to get it working on the Raspberry Pi Zero 2. And I'm going to tweak things a little bit. I think it comes down to power management of the USB, like I mentioned, but I'll get it working. Let's talk about Alder Lake a little bit in relation to M1 Pro and Max when we come back, I promise. Don't go anywhere. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. As promised, I want to talk a bit in depth about Alder Lake versus Apple M1 Max. So, just briefly, I have the original MacBook Pro M1. It's absolutely amazing. My main work rig is a AMD 3900X 12-core 24-thread with an RTX 3090. That's what I use for my video editing. I really don't game much on that 3090, man. I know that's going to shock a lot of people. I don't game much on it. When I game, I'm gaming on my laptop with the RTX 3060, like I mentioned in the last segment, where I basically stream it with Steam, stream it down to my 2012 Mac Mini downstairs, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. So I do my gaming on the RTX 3060, and it's just a monster gaming rig. But that RTX 3090... I have played plenty of Flight Simulator 2020 on it, but I got it for work. I got it for work. That's why I got it, and I use it every day for work. But anyway, so I have an M1, and I have some powerful hardware, and I've kind of experienced this, what people are talking about with the benefits of M1, and then versus, yes, technically you can do more with a beefy desktop processor especially. But the point is, when you're using a beefy desktop processor, AMD or Intel, you are drawing so much more power. And that's kind of the theme as we get into a little bit of a deep dive, for Geek Therapy Radio at least, deep dive here, comparing the M1 Max, the 10-core M1 Max versus the Core i9 12900K Alder Lake Core i9 processor from Intel. So here's the thing. You have seen the headlines. Anybody who's kind of a geek about computer processors and staying on the bleeding edge has seen headlines that the 12900K, let's be specific here, the 12900K, the Core i9, the flagship consumer processor from Intel, now it beats out Apple's M1 in a lot of things. Not everything, but in some things. So for instance, single core performance from the 12900K just edges out the M1 Max. We'll get into kind of benchmarks here in a minute. The overall performance of the 12900K is better than the M1 Max, and the rub is the power efficiency. We'll talk about that. So I'm looking at the website right now, nanoreview.net, and I'm kind of looking at some scores here and some points to take away. So here are, according to the website, according to nanoreview.net, advantages of the Intel Core i9 12900K. Unlocked multiplier, obviously. You can overclock it. Supports up to 128 gigabytes of DDR5 4800 RAM. That's kind of neat there. So if you didn't catch that, supports up to 128 gigabytes. Not just of DDR5. Yes, DDR5 is the next generation of RAM, but supports up to 128 gigs, a consumer processor. And yes, I know there's been other consumer processors in the past, but it's tough to imagine many consumers needing 128 gigabytes of RAM, let alone DDR5. But there you go, it supports it on a consumer-based chip. It has 6 more physical cores than the M1, than the 10-core M1 Max. It has a 63% higher turbo boost frequency, so a turbo boost, the 12900K turbo boosts to 5.2 gigahertz versus the M1 Max 3.2 gigahertz, and it's 13% faster in single-core Geekbench V5 test, 2003 points versus 1777 points for the M1 Max. But the advantages of the Apple M1 Max, according to nanoreview.net, is it's a more M1 Max is a more powerful GPU. It's a 32-core integrated GPU. It's 10.4 teraflops versus 0.78 teraflops. So the integrated graphics on Alder Lake chips, the i9 in this case, doesn't hold a candle. Cannot render a candle compared to the M1 Max's just monstrous 32-core GPU. The 32-core GPU in the M1 Max, by the way, has been compared more or less to an RTX 3080. So yeah, an RTX 3080-ish realm of graphics compared to integrated Intel graphics, that's not really a strong point to make. Obviously, the 3080-esque graphics are going to be better than Iris or Z. All right, so M1 Max also does 332.8 gigabytes per second of higher theoretical bandwidth. That's 433% higher than Alder Lake. But the kicker is that M1 Max consumes up to 76% less energy than the Core i9 12900K. So the M1 Max 10-core, 32-core GPU, integrated GPU, consumes 30 watts compared to Alder Lake consuming 125 watts. And that's not even during boost. During boost, Alder Lake will consume up to and around 250-ish watts. Between 240 and 250 watts is the upper limit of what 12900K will consume versus 30 watts on the M1. So even, yes, let's look at some scores here, and let's keep this power consumption in mind. So Cinebench R23, how much time do I have left in this segment? Oh, I'm good. Cinebench R23 single core, the Core i9, 2034, the M1 Max, 1554. That comes down to, among other things, the much higher clock frequency of a single core on the 12900K versus the 3.2 gigahertz of the M1 Max. Remember, the Core i9 can boost up to 5.2 gigahertz, and the M1 Max can only go up to 3.2 gigahertz. So that's the disparity that's the 500-point disparity between the single core benchmark on R23, Cinebench R23. Multi-core, the Core i9 12900K runs away with it because it has 6 more physical cores, not to mention hyperthreading. So R23 multi-core, the Core i9 12900K is 119% better. It scores 27,650 again, 27,650 versus M1 Max, 12,634. More cores, faster cores, yes, but keep in mind again, it's consuming up to 245 watts, let's say, versus 30 watts. That is over 210 watts maximum over an M1 Max. Anyways, Passmark CPU, it doesn't run on M1 Max, so let's not even talk about that. Geekbench 5. So the Core i9 12900K scores a 2024, where the M1 Max scores an 1804, this is single core performance. So Core i9 2024, M1 Max 1804. That's so close. That's kind of, it's not within room for error. It's just really close. And again, remember, you're consuming a whole lot more power in the i9. So Geekbench 5 multi-core, the Core i9 is 18,539, and the M1 Max is 12,822. Remember, you're talking about up to 210 watts more consumption on that Core i9. Now, why am I mentioning this? It depends on your workload, and for some people, like, still, as far as efficiency, as far as performance per watt, nothing right now beats the Apple M1. Nothing. Intel is not running away with, well, some of these benchmarks it's running away with it, but Intel is coming out ahead here because it's throwing up to 210 more watts at its processor. You throw enough horsepower at anything, it sounds like Jeremy Clarkson, just give it more power, more power, more power, you're going to be able to muscle through more things. Final word as we get out here concerning Alder Lake, be very careful if you're buying an all-in-one system. Some of these all-in-one systems were fabricated before they knew the power consumption of Alder Lake. So if you do get an i9 12900K in a pre-built system, odds are it's not going to be able to. It's going to thermal throttle quite a bit. So just be careful with that. But don't be careful with this. Know that you are worthy of love and you're worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care. If you'd like to sponsor Geek Therapy Radio, just go to geektherapyradio.com and let's talk.